Aaron Rodgers will turn 39 in early December, so we have to wonder what will happen if the Green Bay Packers star quarterback decides to end his career at the end of this season. Rodgers is signed with Green Bay until 2026 when he will be 43 years old. Even though he could play well into his 40s, each offseason for the future first-ballot Pro Football Hall of Famer has been crazier than the last. Green Bay has been struggling a lot this year, so Rodgers could decide he is done with the NFL and move on with his life. First up, Aaron Rodgers and the Packers made a mistake last offseason. Now a trade or retirement has to fix it. At the end of last season, the Aaron Rodgers versus Tom Brady MVP race became a great example of how well a team did despite being seen as weak. Rodgers' best case for MVP was that Brady's receivers and offensive line were much better than anything Rodgers had in Green Bay. One NFC head coach said it better by calling Rodgers' wide receivers and tight ends one great player and a bunch of guys. The coach said, "Look at what he has to work with. He makes everything better." Since that conversation about 10 months ago, elevating has become excoriating. That is, if you were able to read the Packers quarterback's lips during their shocking 15-9 loss to the Detroit Lions on Sunday. It's possible that Rodgers has never shown so much anger and frustration when losing before, and rightly so, since it looked like Green Bay had hit the bottom of the Mariana Trench rather than just losing to a bad team. Even when he was trying to sound upbeat, Rodgers' press conference after the game was full of sighs and painful pauses that made him sound like he was close to giving up. "I definitely had some blank throws," he said. "Yeah, I'm pretty sad. Well, I guess that's about it. I'm just upset. This year, I've definitely learned a lot about life, but it's not over yet. There are still many games to play." When you look at the rest of the Packers' schedule, I'm not sure how many people would call them lucky. Even more so after seeing the loss to Detroit, which was a lot worse than getting exposed by the Buffalo Bills a week earlier. At the very least, this team's loss put to rest some of the rumors about them. Now, some of the theories are starting to look like known facts. Should Rodgers, Packers have parted ways before the 2022 season? First, Davante Adams, the great player the NFC coach was talking about, kept everything together for Rodgers more than we knew over the past few seasons. Second, Rodgers is making big mistakes on the field. This could be because he is frustrated or because he can't believe he isn't as good as he was when he won MVP last year. Third, it doesn't look like any of this will get much better with 8 games left and 5 teams that could make the playoffs. Lastly, let's just say what the last offseason was a mistake. If there was no way to keep Adams on this team, then it didn't make sense to give Rodgers a huge contract extension. Hindsight isn't a great way to judge NFL teams, but it's a great way to accept the way things are right now. And this is how things are for the Packers. Rodgers should not have been given such a long-term deal. Instead, he should have been traded. Or, if that was really what he wanted, he should have quit when he saw Adams walking out the door. Both choices would have been better than what he called frustration on Sunday, but not misery. He is correct about that difference. All of this right now is a source of anger, but when the season is over and Rodgers is looking at another lost year with no easy solution in sight, that will be miserable. Let's talk about more recent events. All of this reminds us of the offseason before last when Rodgers could have been traded to the Denver Broncos for a package similar to what they gave up for Russell Wilson. All Rodgers would have to have done was meet with Green Bay's front office a week after the team's playoff loss to the San Francisco 49ers on January 22nd and tell the Packers he thought it was time for a change. Don't listen to anyone who tells you otherwise. If Rodgers had pushed for it, that trade would have happened, and Green Bay's future timeline would look very different than it does now. So the Packers and Rodgers need to take another look at whether they can still get a fresh start from the mistake they made last offseason. Whether this season's poor play is blamed on Rodgers' injuries and lack of experience or just a disagreement over the game plan, Green Bay needs to try to get something out of this shaky relationship while it still can. And Rodgers' job is to figure out how he wants his career to end. What a 2023 divorce would look like. Some people will find that idea funny, but this is the NFL. People will want to know more. Not only that, but in 2023, some teams might look like they're just one veteran quarterback away from doing something special. There will always be a buyer for a player who was the league MVP for 2 straight years. A lot of them. Rodgers could do do what Tom Brady does and change teams every year, even more if it's the right team with the right talent around it that needs a quarterback to turn the key. Yes, it looks like his contract is a problem, yet it's not untradeable. Rodgers could be traded before June 1st, but the Packers would have to pay a nasty $40.3 million dead salary cap charge in 2023, and then that would be the end of it. Or they could trade him after June 1st and split the dead charge into $15.8 million in 2023 and $24.48 million in 2024, which would be easier to handle. Even though eating that dead cap isn't very appealing, it starts a process that keeps us from having to do a patch job in 2023 and hope that Rodgers has one last flourish. Even a very unlikely Super Bowl flourish could happen. But consider the flip side. Green Bay's record of 3-6 this season could make it easier for the team to get a good quarterback in the first round of the 2023 NFL Draft, which is thought to be a strong class. Or at the very least, it could put the Packers in a position to trade up in the draft for one of the better quarterbacks, if that's a priority. If the goal is to develop young receivers, which it seems to be given that no deal was made at the trade deadline, then why not start training those players with the quarterback who will still be around in 2024 and beyond? That's what the Packers and Rodgers need to figure out now. They should think about 2023 and ask why they should keep doing this for another year. Is it possible to win the Super Bowl with this team? If not, what important steps do you need to take to make that happen? Is there enough money in draft capital to make big changes that make a big difference? Right now, it doesn't feel like that. If anything, this feels like a step backward that everyone hoped wouldn't happen when Adams left. But it did, and now we can see that the last offseason was a mistake. It turns out that the whole last dance thing probably should have been for everyone. It still can, even if it's 1 year too late. With Packers QB Aaron Rodgers playing hurt, what might we see from backup Jordan Love in the final few weeks and next season? We won't see Love again until or unless the Packers are out of the running for the playoffs. Even so, it's not a sure thing. I think from our end of it, we've seen what we need to, said GM Brian Gutekunst recently about Love. Gutekunst said it would be really good for him to play, but he won't let that get in the way of winning, even if the games don't matter for the playoffs. Gutekunst said, when asked why the Packers would keep playing Rodgers after they were eliminated, "I think it has to do with the culture. I think that winning is a way of life. I don't think we've ever gone out there without wanting to win. I just think that's what this place has always been about and will always be about as long as I'm here." So Love's second half performance against the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 12 after Rodgers left with a rib injury could be the only meaningful snaps the third-year backup gets this season. It's also possible that if the Packers lose, they'll change their minds. Are there any coaching or front office jobs on the line? Matt LaFleur, the head coach, could lose the locker room if he doesn't change the defensive coordinators. That hasn't happened yet, and it's important to note that LaFleur's team has worked hard all season, but there's been a clear gap between how talented the defense is and how well it does its job. There have been times this season when players have privately told defensive coordinator Joe Barry that they don't like his game plans or schemes. The Packers went into the season with 7 first-round picks and several expensive veteran free agents on that side of the ball. But the same problems still exist. They're 30th in run defense, both in yards allowed per game and per rush. Their passing numbers look good. They're 5th in yards allowed per pass. But the average mistakes that got them in trouble in Week 1 have not stopped. Barry was a risky choice as a coordinator in Washington and Detroit 2 years ago, but LaFleur needed someone to run the Vic Fangio and Brandon Staley scheme after Mike Pettine left. Barry doesn't have a clear replacement, but Jerry Gray, who is in charge of the secondary and passing game, might get a look because his players love him. So could Wisconsin's former interim coach Jim Leonhard, who dropped out of the running 2 years ago before the Packers, choose Barry? What do you believe should be next for Aaron Rodgers and the Packers? Comment down below. Well, that's it for today's video. We hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.